This is part 2 of our starting the game example involving a battle between French Canadian and English Colonial. In our first video, it was determined that the English Colonial were the attackers or invaders and the French Canadians were the defenders. Each player is now required to choose terrain from the defenders' army list. That army list being the Canadian French. In this respect, the Canadian French player must, as they are compulsory, choose a river and a wood in addition to 2 to 3 other terrain features. The English player, as the invader, is entitled to choose 0 to 2 terrain feature equivalents. For CanCon 2025, with a view to reducing gamesmanship, we require the players to write down the types of terrain that they will attempt to place on the battlefield. They do this in secret and then show each other what has been chosen. For our example game, the French player has chosen a wood, which is compulsory, a river, which is compulsory, a gully, a hill steep, and a built-up area. Each of those terrain types is available to be chosen in their published army list. The English player, likewise, must choose from the French Canadians' list of terrain and decides to choose a road and another river. But before the players disclose to each other what types of terrain they have chosen, the players determine which sides of the table are to be allocated which numbers for the purpose of placing those types of terrain chosen. In this respect, the side to the left of the defender is nominated 1. The side on which the invader will deploy, the invader's base edge, is nominated 2. The side to the right of the defender and the left of the invader is 3. And the defender's base edge is 4. The defender then gets to nominate which side will be 5, and the invader gets to nominate which side will be 6. The defender nominates their 5 first and nominates the defender's left flank. The invader then nominates their 6 and nominates the defender's base edge. There is, in this process, some subtle tactic, though we are not sure what that is, noting that the invader gets to nominate their side second, though the defender gets to nominate the bulk of the terrain. Once the numbers 1 to 6 have been allocated to the various sides of the battlefield, the next step is to place terrain. The order that terrain is placed on the table as dictated by the rules commences with waterways, then rivers, then hills that are difficult, otherwise defined as a capital H, open brackets, capital S, close brackets, or hill steep, then other hills, capital H, open brackets, capital G, close brackets, roads, built-up areas, fields, and then the rest of the terrain in the order chosen by the invader. For our example game between the French Canadians and the English Colonials, no one chose a waterway, and indeed the next type of terrain to be placed as dictated by the rules is a river. Both players chose a river. However, the defender gets to place their river first. So the defender rolls a d6 to determine from which edge the river flows. The defender rolls a 2. Next, the defender rolls a d6 to determine where the river is flowing to. Again, they roll a 2. In DBR, a river cannot flow from one edge back to that same edge, and so the second 2 is deemed to be a 3 in that the river flows to the next clockwise edge. A river between two edges separated by only a single corner must not originate or end within 600 paces of that corner. For the purpose of CanCon 2025, that is 72 centimetres. And so the French-Canadian player places the river accordingly. The English colonial player then gets to place their river, and firstly rolls a 1 from where the river is flowing from, and a 4 for where it is flowing to. Again, the English colonial player cannot have the river originating or ending within 72 centimetres of the corner between sides nominated 1 and 4. The result is as follows. The next piece of terrain in the order of placement are hills. Of course, the French player chose a hill steep and now dices to place what will be the first area feature, rivers being a linear feature. In this respect, the French player rolls a 2 for the first dice and must place the hill closer to the edge designated 2 than any other edge. The French player then rolls a second dice and rolls a 5. For the first area feature, this means that it must be placed within 5 times 50 paces, or for CanCon 2025, 300 centimetres of the edge designated 2. The French player places it next to a river, as there is no restriction as to how close the hill may be placed to that linear feature. For clarity, a river is a linear feature, so are roads. A hill is an area feature. Following hills, the next type of terrain to be placed are roads. The English player selected a road and now dices, similar to a river, where that road will start and where that road will end. In this regard, the first dice rolled by the English player is a 4, and so the road must start on the edge numbered 4. The second dice rolled by the English player is a 1, and as a consequence, the English player's road looks like this. Where the road crosses the river, and yes, a road can cross a river, at the crossing there is either a ford or a bridge. The election as to whether it is a ford or a bridge at the river is up to the player who places the river. It is not specifically dictated in the rules, but this is how it will be played at CanCon 2025. After roads, the next type of terrain to be placed are built-up areas. The French player selected a built-up area and rolls a 4. That means that the built-up area, which is an area piece, must be closer to the edge designated 4 than any other edge. In addition, there are rules about where built-up areas may be placed, which provide that a built-up area must be on a road, adjoin the battlefield or waterway edge corresponding to their first dice. There is no definition of what on a road means, but for CanCon 2025 it will mean that it needs to be directly adjacent or abutting the road or straddle the road. There is also no definition of what adjoining the battlefield or waterway edge corresponding to the first dice means. But for the purpose of CanCon 2025, it must mean that part of the built-up area terrain piece base must be touching the battlefield edge or the waterway. So as to finally place the built-up area, the French player rolls a 6, which means it must be at least 6 times 50 paces away from any other area feature. In this respect, of course, waterways, rivers and roads are linear features. Having placed rivers, hills, a road and a built-up area, and neither player having selected a field, the rest of the terrain is to be placed in the order chosen by the invader by type. In this respect, the invader gets to elect what type of terrain is placed, not which feature is to be placed. The English player then chooses for rough going to be placed next. And the French player places a gully. In so doing, the French player rolls a 6 and a 4. The only terrain that is then left to be placed are the 2 compulsory woods that have been selected by the French player, and as such, it does not matter if the invader chooses to place them or otherwise, they are the last type of terrain to be placed. Again, the invader does not get to choose which feature the defender places first, only the type of feature that is placed. For the first wood, the French player rolls a 1, followed by a 4, and places the wood as shown. In this respect, the road that had traversed the river is now also going through the forest. For the last wood, the French player rolls a 3, followed by a 6, and places the wood next to the river here as shown. Whilst the wood is required to be 36 centimetres away from any other area feature, it is not required to be any specific distance away from the linear feature that is the river. The result of the placing of terrain process has ended up looking like this. Now, whilst the terrain placement process can seem daunting and somewhat convoluted at times, we have provided relevant reference sheets which players can follow like a bouncing ball to get through it relatively quickly. Whilst it takes some time to explain, in practice, often terrain is very quick. Players should remember that if they are the invader, they are not required to put any terrain down. Players should also remember that if they are the defender, any compulsory terrain is not included in the 2 to 3 feature equivalents a defender is required to place on the battlefield.